Welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston. Today I'm taking on some newly introduced legislation that focuses on drivers' training. Specifically, the objective is to expand the drivers' training program in Michigan to teach young drivers, new drivers, how to drive safely through work zones. The idea, obviously, is to create safer drivers to protect themselves and the workers, something we've talked about a lot on this podcast. First, I spoke with Brian Sarkella, who is the Michigan chapter president for the American Traffic Safety Services Association, known as ATSA. He's also a consultant with ROW here in Michigan. He had some compelling testimony on the bill earlier this week. Later, I spoke with Tom Robbins, who is in Oklahoma and has been instrumental in passing legislation there that deals with this and has helped out with similar curriculum in other states through his work with Work Zone Safe. He became interested in this when he worked for an energy agency for the state of Oklahoma a few years back and realized that this is just as important to utility workers as it is to road workers and many others. He had some interesting things to say about what was involved in adopting the legislation there and what they do. I hope you enjoy the conversations. So as mentioned, I'm back with Brian Sarkella, who is the chapter president for ATSA Michigan. He's also with ROW, a consulting firm here in Michigan that does a lot of work on roads at the state and local level. Brian, I was quite moved by your compelling testimony Tuesday in committee about this legislation. It's obviously very personal to you. So talk first about what motivated you to get behind this advocacy and, what your fervent hopes are for it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. We've noticed a lot of unfortunate trends in the industry recently, especially in Michigan, where we've had continued crashes and ultimately fatalities for road users and too many workers. And we want to make sure that we're definitely pushing the message forward to make sure that we get more education in our work zones for any new driver that enters our roadways here in Michigan. And we also wanted to extend it to the trucking industry as well and make sure anyone seeking an operator's license gets that work zone education as well.
I was surprised, I guess, to hear that this wasn't already a focus of the curriculum in Michigan. There's been so much advocacy for work zone safety. As you know, we're still trying to get in place a system under a law passed a couple of years ago to put safety cameras in work zones, so people will know how fast they're going, and they'll be cited when they speed in work zones. And that's not a revenue generating proposal by any means. It's strictly another means of deterrent. But I guess when you took on your role as chapter president for this and really got deeply into this and saw that some other states had already taken a lead, were you surprised that this wasn't already part of our curriculum?
Yes, very surprised. There is some required education, but it's extremely minimal. It's just a couple of areas that get hit on. And in talking with some folks recently that have teenage drivers that have gone through education here in Michigan, it might be a couple of minutes at most. And that's why we wanted to make sure that we set a minimum requirement of 30 minutes. And that's for both the new drivers and for the commercial license. And one of the reasons we wanted to hit all new drivers is because not everybody gets their driver's license necessarily as a teenager. Several other states have set this up for teen drivers, but we wanted to make sure that anyone that gets a new license here in Michigan is provided that work zone education as part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, you never know when somebody moves here from another state, they might at some point have to renew their license and get a Michigan license. And so, or not to mention just some people wait longer these days to get licenses than they used to. Not every kid, goes right out at 16. So I think it's a good point that you're making, that this isn't just about the new drivers coming out of the drivers training programs. It sounds to me like from the testimony and what I read about these bills, the 30 minutes would probably be mostly classroom. There isn't a specific requirement for driving through the work zones while they're in that training or in that class.
Correct. The initial step we wanted to take was to make sure there was education in the classroom for it. And then ultimately, we would like to have requirements for the field testing as well to make sure that the instructors take drivers through work zones so they can educate them as they go through there as well. But our initial first step, we wanted to make sure that we provided the education in the classroom.
It seems like something that could be simulated in the classroom, really.
Yes, and there are some things that we've seen nationally that there's definitely some options for simulation, and I'm sure we've all seen the drunk goggles and different things like that. There's definitely ways to provide simulated education in the classrooms. It just needs the right people to make sure the necessary steps are taken to get the right level of education to the new drivers.
Is this the first time you've got involved at the legislative level with something, really at the ground level that you're advocating for and testifying for?
Yeah, so we have had a few advocacy days as part of our ATSA Michigan chapter. This was our fourth this year, and really we gained some good traction last year with Rep. Alexander's office on this work zone education for new drivers. And it does take time. It's taken us, several months to get through the process and to get a bill introduced. But yes, this is my first time as going through this process legislatively.
Yeah, we should mention that this is sponsored by Representative Gregory Alexander. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So talk about your experience with this, dealing with a lawmaker and then testifying before committee. Hearing some questions and having to answer those questions. I mean, how did you feel like it all went?
Initially, there's a natural nervousness to it, but thankful to ATSA and their staff to help me prep and prepare for this was very, very good. And obviously getting through my testimony, practicing a little bit, but realizing at the end of the day that these are fellow human beings sitting, on the committee that we were speaking to, and many of them, have children or will have children that are drivers. So really just letting them know that we are experts in our respective areas. For us, it's the roadway safety industry, and providing the information and the facts and statistics that support why this is so important. So it helps to understand that it's just another fellow human being across the table that we were speaking to, and making sure we hit home on the importance of this.
Yeah, this is where I should remind folks that MDOT doesn't have any enforcement powers here, would not be the agency in charge of this. This would be the Secretary of State's office that's in charge of the curriculum for drivers training programs. But MDOT would certainly have a role in working, once this legislation becomes law, if it does, on what might be in that curriculum and, what we need to think about in terms of work zones, which is obviously a big deal to the department and everybody that works at the local level too, in roadway projects where people are speeding by. Could you talk about your experience with this and what you think resonates with people that you talk to? Because, there's been so many campaigns and people have tried so many different things. I think it was North Carolina that did a pretty creative video a few years ago where they actually simulated people working in an office, sitting at their desks with, cars driving by at 70 miles an hour to try to make the point that this is their office, this is where these people work, and what that's like. When you talk to, your colleagues and family and friends about this, what do you think, gets people's attention?
I think the main thing is, as you reference, is the speeds. Most people do not know what it's like to be working on a roadway with someone that's traveling by at 60, 70, 80, even 90 miles an hour, where our workers and our field inspection staff and surveyors are truly next to live traffic. I know that's one area that a few people I've talked with, they might have pulled over to change a tire on the side of the road. And just that experience alone really hits home. So getting people to understand what it's like to be working next to live traffic, I think that North Carolina video was very much hit home in that regard. So I think once people realize what it's like to be next to live traffic and be so exposed while we're trying to do our jobs every day is one of the biggest pieces. And then ultimately the impact it has when there's a crash or a fatality on the roadway where lives are unfortunately and sadly lost because of decisions that folks have made in work zones.
Have you ever been a passenger in a vehicle with somebody, obviously not a colleague because they would be as cognizant of this as you are, but somebody else that approached a work zone and you felt the need to say, hey, you really ought to slow down?
Absolutely. I primarily drive when we're out and about, but when I'm a passenger in a vehicle, I always encourage and almost hound the driver to make sure that they slow down in work zones.
Yeah, how do you deal with, and we've all had this experience, those of us that are highly sensitive to it. You're going through the work zone at the proper speed, and you've got somebody right on your bumper and other cars backed up behind them who just frankly aren't as concerned about it for whatever reason. Maybe they're ignorant of the law or ignorant of the possibilities that it's not just these workers that are in danger, it's also them as a driver. So how do you deal with that?
It becomes easier and easier to deal with because we know that we're making an effective change by driving the speed that we're supposed to be traveling at. Yes, it causes backups. People might honk and drive by and provide you with, other ways that they're unhappy with you. But at the end of the day, we're making an effective difference. And obviously, we don't want to be a hindrance while we're driving through work zones, but driving speeds that are appropriate for the conditions is the biggest change that we want to try to make there.
So I think the compelling testimony that really, and I noticed that the legislators across the panel were riveted when you talked about why this is so personal for you. This involved a crash last summer in a work zone that I drive often on I-96 between Grand Rapids and Lansing. Former MDOT employee who was then working for your company. Talk a little bit about that and how that motivated your testimony.
Yes, Matt Balgowan was a wonderful person, a great colleague, someone I looked up to almost immediately once he started working for Roe. I only had a chance to work with him for about 3 years, but I knew many people that were affected by him, and it was a very tragic loss for the industry, for our company, for his family. Leaving behind a wife, a son, daughter-in-law, and 3 daughters is very tough. And I've had a lot of conversations with Danielle, Matt's wife, over the last 9 months or so here. Matt was crashed into on I-96 near Ionia in July of last year by a commercial vehicle that was estimated traveling 60 miles per hour, and the vehicle did not slow down. So we can all understand what the effects of that are. But losing someone and getting that phone call, it still resonates today. And I know I was a bit emotional yesterday testifying, and even when I spoke about Matt at our National Work Zone Awareness Week event a couple of weeks ago, it still hits home. The grief is still there to lose someone that I looked up to and lose somebody that a lot of people in the transportation world knew and respected. Is a huge loss to our industry and to his family as well.
I think it's hard for us to even imagine, with all that's done now with technology and plain old signs, to alert people miles ahead of time that they're coming into a work zone and that there could be backups. And yet people, in this case, a specific driver, for whatever reason, and I don't know if we even know the reason for sure, because I think so much of the evidence that the police would have used was burned up, how they couldn't have known that they were coming up on a queue where people might be backed up, and indeed were. It's just, it's astounding to me.
Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we provide this education, because, one, for new drivers, all teens and all new drivers should be educated in work zones. It's critical to reducing the crashes and ultimate fatalities that do occur on our roadways, but also to commercial vehicles. Those are large, heavy vehicles, and they take a long time to stop. So when they're not slowing down appropriately, they can be very destructive. And unfortunately, that's what happened in Matt's situation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that as part of this curriculum, what I would encourage anybody who does at any of these driver training schools, which are pretty much all private these days, is to have a veteran worker come in and talk to the students about what life is like out there. An actual hard hat that has experienced this. I think that could really get people's attention. Absolutely.
And also hearing testimony from the families that have lost a member because of a work zone crash, an incident. That's the way to really hit home to people. Unfortunately, it takes fatalities for people to realize the repercussions of their decisions. Yeah, that is the sad reality. Well, Brian, thank you for taking time to talk about this and for your advocacy, and good luck with the legislation as it moves forward. I appreciate you taking time here. Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity, and we'll keep our fingers crossed this gets voted out of committee and onto the House floor here in no time.
So again, I'll be back in just a minute with Tom Robbins from Oklahoma to talk more about this topic.
In Michigan, safety comes first on the roads. To combat distracted driving, Michigan passed the hands-free law.
The law makes holding or manually using a cell phone or other mobile electronic device while operating a vehicle a primary offense. This means an officer can stop and ticket you for violating the law.
This can include, but not limited to, sending or receiving a call, sending, receiving, or reading a text or email, accessing, reading, or posting to social media sites, or entering locations into the phone GPS.
With this law in place, drivers are encouraged to stay focused, keeping their hands on the wheel and their attention on the road. Drive smart, drive safe, drive hands-free.
Michigan's hands-free law, making the road safer for everyone.
So as promised, our second segment today is with Tom Robbins. Tom, talk a little bit about your background first and how this came to be a priority for you.
I actually served as a Deputy Secretary of Energy for the previous governor. When it comes to energy development in the state, what you need to know is that thousands of trucks are going to show up in rural places with one stoplights, and quickly those communities can get overrun. And unfortunately, some people can get potentially hurt, injured, or killed, which has happened in West Texas and New Mexico and some other places. So in identifying that, I was asked to, we founded what was called the Energize for Safety Coalition, focused on energy, traffic, and safety and improving those outcomes. So I got together the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, our county commissioners, elected officials, school leaders. And what we found out very quickly was that kids on 2-lane highways struggled to understand, to know how to respect and share the road with heavy truck traffic and equipment in the energy industry. Out of that, I would see these people wearing orange ribbons, my good friends from the Department of Transportation and the Turnpike and their contractors, asking what that meant. They said, Tom, that's for work zone safety. I was like, well, tell me more. And they said, well, we've had over 70 of our employees killed. I was totally blown away. Probably like most citizens, had no idea the number of people that had hurt, injured, or killed. In fact, when they shared with me that outside of the National Guard, that they've had more people killed than any other state agency, including the Highway Patrol. And in fact, half of the Highway Patrol, when they're killed, unfortunately, it's because they're out on the road. They're doing traffic control. They're helping out in a work zone, and they had a memorial in front of their headquarters. We evaluated what they were using to educate and engage teens, and it was a pamphlet way out of date, and with information that teens would promptly sort of toss in the garbage. And so I said, hey, do we want to apply some of the lessons that we learned in energy, traffic, and safety, and working with teens to getting them to understand how those risks can impact them? And they said, absolutely. And that's how the idea of Work Zone Safe as an effort was started in Oklahoma.
How does Work Zone Safe fit in, I guess, with all those other agencies? It sounds like you kind of took the lead, but you brought everybody together. You built a little bit of a consortium to support this. Yeah, so there's what I always say is, regardless of the point of entry, everybody who's sharing the road has a united goal. From the drivers to the passengers to those that are working on the road to the first responders, and that's to arrive safely at home. And that was the group. If I said, look, if you're representing drivers or passengers, or better yet, you have a flashing light or a reflective piece of clothing in your truck or in your car because you don't want to be hurt, injured, killed, or run over, you're on the team. And so it was very inclusive that way, bringing everybody together. And the goal was that the risk was being elevated. A record number of people coming out of COVID had been hurt, injured, or killed on our roadways. It was declared a public health crisis by the Secretary of Transportation at the time. And it was kind of an all hands on deck effort. And what we realized was that if and when kids were being engaged or educated on work zone and movement or safety, it was kind of through a pamphlet. They'd get a pamphlet with a plastic bag and a pen in it. And when it came to protecting workers, saving lives, and keeping people safe on the roadway, that just wasn't cutting it. So Work Zone Safe was this effort to really roll up the sleeves and modernize the effort, to shred our pamphlets and to implement real tools that would get real results. I think that you make a good point that a lot of people don't realize that often those workers that they see out there are actually utility workers. They're not necessarily road workers. A lot of that work has to be done in conjunction with road work, but sometimes it's not. And so your background in energy makes a lot of sense from that standpoint, because we're used to seeing linemen, perhaps, in our neighborhoods doing that kind of work, but often they're out on a 2-lane or even on a freeway doing that work. So it makes sense.
Surveyors to linemen to first responders. There's so many people that the roadway is their work area, and that they're counting on you to help them make it safely through back home to the families and friends that they love at the end of the day. That's the shared goal. But we set a new standard. So Work Zone Safe, we have a mission. That mission is for every new driver to know that there's a face and family behind every flag, cone, and flashing light. So the standard is, in anything that we do, the mission that we have that has now grown throughout the entire country, has been adopted by states and has scaled programs with us, is that the mission is simple. That these drivers know that there's a face and family behind every flag, cone, and flashing light. That's the new standard. People are often, hit over the head with a message of comply, comply, comply. And it's important. We have laws for very important reasons, and we have elevated fines and work zones and on the roadways to help people safe. But particularly this generation that's getting their driver's license now, they don't want to know just, hey, I need to comply. They need to discover their why. So we want to give them that why, that empathy piece. And that begins with them understanding, which no one's ever told them before, that there's a face and family behind every flag, cone, and flashing light. So that's the ultimate glow. And then embedding all the principles of impaired driving, distracted driving, seatbelt speeding, and all those things under that umbrella of that human element.
So were you surprised either by the challenge involved in getting this legislation over the finish line, or would you say that it was actually easier than you might have thought when you first launched into it?
So when I first proposed, what we did in Oklahoma is we introduced it voluntarily. We got a coalition together. All of us came together and they bought into this idea and plan I proposed that Oklahoma take Work Zone and Move Over Safe seriously by modernizing our efforts, that we shred our pamphlets. We do two things. One is we do kind of a hands-on voluntary walk through Work Zone where they meet a face behind the flag, cone, and flashing light. And then we have a course that they can sign up for. And then we also, as we were doing so from day one, had scholarships and some fun things like sports tickets that they could win to kind of give a carrot or incentivize teens to thank them and or their parents for directing them towards the course, to taking it and learning about it. So we'd had a couple of thousand teen drivers, new drivers who had gone through the course, got great feedback on what they were learning, and were able to recognize and reward drivers. But when I then said, hey, what if we actually stepped up to the plate and met this crisis with some real legislation that would have teen drivers having a requirement for them to complete, that they know about Work Zone and Move Over Safety by completing this course. People were enthusiastic. They wanted to see it done, but they were skeptical because they'd never seen anything done like that before. But we had worked with, road safety impacts every legislator. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or what your political persuasion or background is. Everybody knows somebody, unfortunately, that's been hurt, injured, or killed. And as we talk to legislators across the state, regardless of their districts, rural, urban, Republican, or Democrat, there was a recognition that something needed to be done. And so we were able to do this. I think one of the things was we were able to deliver it online. So it was able to go to students all across the state. The other thing, which I know mirrors the legislation that's been proposed in Michigan out of the box, we said, hey, for that user, this is valuable information, but we don't want them to have a charge directly to take it. So we weren't going to charge them, $79.95 to take the course.
Yeah.
And so they could take it 365, 24/7, just how teens learn today, online at their own pace, when they needed it, log in, just simply with a name and an email to get through the course and to get the information that they needed. And so it was, we got it authored by our House Transportation Chair, Representative Ronnie Johns. We got it authored by our Public Safety Senate Chair, Senator Yeck. Got it passed through both committees. We had our coalition show up to those committees, talk to those members, obviously in advance. Everyone from tow truck drivers who had been brushed off the side of the road to unfortunately had colleagues that were killed, or our highway patrolman, Trooper Eric Foster, who had been hit in a work zone, was there, to obviously our road builders. Our DOT was supportive. And at the end of the day, I think giving lawmakers an opportunity to say, hey, there's something, we're not going to mandate something. We already have the mandate to keep workers safe and to educate teens about Work Zone and Move Over Safety. What we're going to do with this bill is modernize it. And pamphlets aren't cutting it. We're going to modernize it. And so collectively, thankfully, our governor, our legislature got behind that modernization effort. And it passed unanimously out of both committees, and then passed almost unanimously off the House and Senate floors, and was signed by Governor Kevin Stitt at the very tail end of 2023. So in 2024, Oklahoma became the first state in the country to have a Work Zone and Move Over Safe education requirement for their new teen drivers.
So I have to ask you the question I always ask everybody when we talk about this, and that's we just know it's really difficult to break through on this, not just with teens, but with all drivers. What do you find resonates when you talk to, family or friends about this topic? What actually gets their attention? Because so many of these messages and so much of the campaigns just seem to, fade into the ether for people.
So one is we do a really good job as an industry, promoting and talking about safety. The challenge is we tend to be talking about that to ourselves. Typically at a work zone safe memorial or event, everyone's going to be part of the DOT, a contractor, a first responder, somebody who's been personally impacted. The great thing about this effort is it meets teens right before they're getting the keys placed in their hand, which isn't a right, it's a responsibility. It's an awesome responsibility to be behind the wheel, to be able to get to places where you need to go, to unlock doors as far as freedom, but it also has a personal responsibility that it can seriously hurt, injure, or kill someone. And so we're meeting them right at that decision point. What I like to say is nobody wakes up on their 40th birthday and decides to finally be a work zone safe driver and move over safe for first responders. They either understand that principle when they're 15, 16, 17 years old and are introduced to that. And so really we have an introductory point that we weren't reaching before. We had great content. The Department of Transportation, the Turnpike Authority, Highway Patrol has, like every state does, very heart-tugging, just great messages and videos that can deliver the message. What we lacked was the ability to get it in front of folks, and the way that we solve that is doing it right before their driver's license. So we're reaching a constituency that we need to absolutely reach, which is new drivers. We're doing so at a point where they're thinking about and learning about driving, and then we're bringing that message home. So it was a new way to deliver great messages in a unified fashion to a group that needed to hear it, if that makes sense.
Are there any measures? Is it too soon? These things take a while to play out before we can tell if they've made a dent or not. But are there any measures where you can say you think it's had some success?
Well, yeah, you're right. It's a little too soon. But before, we'd go to events and we'd set up a walkthrough work zone where the teams would meet a face behind the flag cone and flashing light. And then they'd be invited to take the course. And that would be really the first time you could tell that they were ever hearing about the faces behind the flag cone and flashing light. Now we go to events with our Department of Transportation, our Turnpike, our contractors, and we set those up. What we hear from the teens immediately is like, oh, yeah, I took that course. But when I got my driver's license, there's already that recognition. Then I always pause and I look at them and say, okay, what'd you learn? And they'll say, I need to put my phone down. I need to pay attention. There's faces and families behind there. When you talk to teens, they're anxious and nervous to go through a work zone. They're white knuckling it through it. They don't feel prepared. They get scared with the barriers, with the shifting lanes. We want to take them from being scared to prepared. And so having that conversation and allowing them to actually go in greater depth with the signs, scenarios, and laws is a service to them and one that they're actually asking for, because they'll tell you that they have anxiety. The other thing is, and I'm just going to be frank, they have terrible examples in the car growing up, typically with their parents and the other people that are driving. When you ask teens, which I do often, which of you would say that you have a work zone safe, move over safe driver as a parent or in the car that you've been growing up with? And by safe, I just mean that they don't go more than 5 over and they're not on a phone when they go through a work zone. And 90% of the kids say, no, my parents, they're speeding and or they're on a phone.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
So the challenge is, even if they're getting a safety message from mom and dad, a lot of the behaviors that they're seeing from the back seat aren't matching what they're being told, right? So the best thing you have as a parent is your example. And so that's the other thing that I get to talk to a lot of parents about is I say, look, you're the number one teacher for your child. And if you want them to come home safe every day and you don't want them to have a crash and you don't want them to be injured or worse, we need you to be able to have eyes up, phone down, buckle up, slow down. That message needs to go to your new teen driver, but it also needs to go to you. So yeah, we've had great success, very little hiccups. We have over about 4,000 to 5,000 kids a month who now take Oklahoma Work Zone Safe. They know the names and faces on that memorial now. They know the stories. They know that there were veterans, that there were coaches, that there were members in the community that no longer get to come home. They learned about impairment, speeding, distraction, moving over safe, the laws, the signs, and the scenarios. Since then, we've had multiple states reach out to us, and we've partnered with them and to be able to bring a program to their state to be able to kind of turnkey do that. Connecticut's a perfect example. Unfortunately, they had a worker that was killed about a year ago. The head of the DOT, Garrett E. Solito, called and said, hey, I don't want to just put another memorial on our memorials. I want to do something like you guys have done in Oklahoma. They passed a law so every new teen driver completes Connecticut Work Zone Safe, and every single one of them knows the name and information about that driver that was killed, or excuse me, the worker that was killed. They went a step further. So if you've never had a license and you're getting a license in the state of Connecticut, so you delayed it, or maybe you're new to the country or whatever your situation is, you also have to take Work Zone Safe. So you're getting that baseline. In addition to that, if you get a ticket violation in a Connecticut work zone, you're required to take Work Zone Safe. So in that state, we reach not just the adults, or excuse me, not just the teens, but also the new drivers who might be older, and then also adults who are offenders in a work zone. Because again, yeah, comply, pay the fine, but really we want you to know your why, and we want you to have a shift in behavior because you know and understand the reason behind work zone safety.
But your legislation, it sounds like from what you said, the language is actually pretty succinct and pretty simple, right? But it includes the word shall.
Yep. So it's very simple. It's one word. It's one sentence. So we have a graduated license system in Oklahoma, like a lot of states do. So before they get their graduated license, the requirement that was added is one sentence. It's shall complete the Oklahoma Department of Transportation's free approved course on work zone and move over safety, period. The nice thing about that is we're able to go in and update it. You know, we've had some impacts, particularly around impaired driving since medical marijuana was passed in the state. Unfortunately, we had some girls that were killed who made some just poor decisions that a lot of teenagers do about impaired driving that involve THC and marijuana in a work zone. And because of that, we introduced this past October during National Teen Driver Work Zone Safe Week, we introduced an impairment section with the Department of Transportation to talk about the impacts of THC, marijuana, of course, DUI, other drugs. When there's new devices, new signs, we update those. And so it's an ongoing living, breathing curriculum that we're able to update that kids complete for free before they get their license.
Well, that's a good point. I don't think that anybody should think that if this legislation gets out of the legislature and is signed by the governor, that means that we're done with this. There's always going to be room for improvement. I think that's true in every state. So I'm glad you made that point. Well, Tom, thank you so much for talking about this and how things have gone in Oklahoma. It's a good model, and it sounds like other states are looking your way, so you should feel good about that.
Absolutely. We'll have over 250,000 kids in 2026, new teen drivers that'll take and complete Work Zone Safe online in more than 6 states all across the country. And glad that Michigan's looking at doing a similar education legislative effort because we know that when teens understand that there's a face and family behind every flag cone and flashing a light, that we can save lives. So yeah, pretty exciting.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you again.
I'd like to thank you once more for tuning in to Talking Michigan Transportation. You can find show notes and more on Apple Podcasts or Buzzsprout. I also want to acknowledge the talented people who help make this a reality each week, starting with Randy Debler, who skillfully edits the audio, Jesse Ball, who proofs the content, and Jackie Salinas, who posts the podcast to various platforms and transcribes the audio to make it accessible to all.